Good day, students. I will be focusing on these examples where I will be looking at the losses that take place during the process, and I will do 3 examples, and I will also use the theory in terms of explaining these examples in terms of how do you account for the loss that took place during the process of production. It first says, how do you calculate how many units reach the inspection point? Then it says you must first establish whether the opening and the closing stock moved through the point of inspection or not. So now, in everything that you do, you first have to ask yourself that question: did the opening stock or the closing stock pass or move through the inspection point? Then they say start with the total input and output units. Then after, you have to check whether the opening or the closing stock moved through the inspection point. Then if the answer is not, that means if the opening or the closing did not move past the point of inspection, therefore now you must deduct the units of the opening or the units of the closing that it did not pass that point of inspection. Then it further says if the answer tends to be yes, then it tells us that we do nothing. Meaning, if the inventory, yes, did pass the point of inspection, then we do nothing, or we do not deduct anything. We just use the total input or output units as units inspected. So now they further tell us something that is very important. I'll emphasize and link all this theory when I'm doing these examples. It says opening stock move from a given percentage or a percentage given to 100%. That means if we see the opening stock in the lines or underline that I will do, it indicates that the opening inventory will start from that given percentage up to 100%. Therefore, now meaning by the end of the day or end of the period, that opening stock would have been finished and became finished product, which is 100% by the end of the period. However, when it comes to the closing stock, they say it moves from 0% and up to a given percentage. That means when you see the closing stock in the underline that I will do, you have to know that that closing stock started at 0% and it will end in the given percentage as the closing stock by the end of the given process period. Then now it says that if during this movement opening stock or closing stock does not move past the point of inspection, it will be deducted from the total input output units to get to the inspected units. That means if both the opening and the closing stock they did not pass the point of inspection, that means the answer is not. Therefore, now we have to deduct the number of the units that are the closing units and the opening units from the input and the output units in order for us to get to the inspected number of units. That means the number of units that must be inspected, because we don't inspect units that do not pass through the point of inspection in the current period. So now if they don't pass the point of inspection, therefore now we have to remove them so that we calculate the number of units that will be inspected in a given period. So now we have example number 1 that I will start with, and I will go to example number 2 and example number 3, and I will thoroughly explain both of them in details. Then example number 1 says total input output units. That means they are telling us that we started with 20,000 units. These are the units that we started with. So now they tell us that though we started with the 20,000 units, which is input output units, the opening work in process, it is 40%, and the number of units that were the opening work in process, it was 2,000 units. These are the 2,000 units that are 40% in terms of completion with regard to the conversion cost, meaning the direct labor and the manufacturing overhead. So now the opening units that were 40% complete in terms of conversion cost, it was only 2,000 units. And by the end of this period, we had the closing stock, which was 60% complete in terms of conversion cost. And those units that were 60% complete in terms of conversion cost, it was a total number of 5,000 units. And they give us now the total loss of 5,000 units. So now let me first link what I've just seen in this information with what has been said before. Look here, it says opening stock is 40%. And with regard to conversion cost, and that is 2,000 units. Let me go and refer to what I've explained before. It said here opening stock move from a given percent up to 100%. So now when I do the underline, I will have to link the two, and said the closing stock move from 0% up to a given percentage. And I'll have to link this with the closing stock because it's exactly what it meant. So now I will try to explain the two in terms of what do they mean. Then now we are told that the total loss, this is not normal either abnormal loss. Remember, we have two types of losses. The normal loss, which is the loss that is expected, and whenever the loss is above what is expected, therefore now it becomes abnormal loss. So far we don't know how much is normal loss and we don't know how much is abnormal loss until we do the calculations based on either the opening stock and the closing stock did pass through the point of inspection or not. So now we are given the total loss of 5,000 units. That means out of the 20,000 input or units that we started with, there were some damages along the way, or there was water evaporation, because water evaporation also does lead to uncontrollable losses. So now, though we started with 20,000 units in the beginning, but there were units that were lost during the process of production. So now they are telling us that the total loss is 5,000 rands. So 5,000 units, we still have to determine either which of this is normal and which of this is abnormal. So now it says inspection takes place when production is 50% complete. So now that means when the units are 50% in terms of completion, or when the units are half done, therefore now there will be inspection, and the minute inspection takes place at 50%, therefore now we'll be able to determine if we made a loss during the process of production. So now this is the point where we have to determine either have we made a loss or a loss in the production process, either normal or abnormal loss. Then after it says normal loss is 10% of the units that reach, take note, that reach the point of inspection, So now they are telling us that there is what is called normal loss, which is 10% of the units that reach the point of inspection. And be mindful of the fact that a normal loss is the loss that is expected, and a normal loss is the loss that is controllable. So now it means we expect that this number of units, which is 10%, it will be lost because of the production process. Then now, if it's also uncontrollable because we don't have control over evaporation of water. If let us say you are busy with a product that involves water or liters, and more especially if the water is boiled, so now as the water evaporates, then automatically some liters or small drops of water will be lost, and that loss is uncontrollably. We don't have control over that loss as the business. So now that is called a normal loss. However, abnormal loss is a controllable. It's a controllable loss, because abnormal loss can occur if let us say there is a breakdown of the machine or there is a damage of the material. So now all those, they will result to something that is unexpected. However, when it comes to normal loss is expected. Abnormal loss it is unexpected, and abnormal loss is controllable. However, normal loss is uncontrollable. Will always incur a normal loss as the company, more especially when it comes to the production process. So now they tell us that the uncontrollable loss, which is normal loss, is 10% of the units that reach the point of inspection. Then after it says material is added at the beginning and conversion cost is added uniformly. That means when we start production, all the ingredients in terms of material that are needed for this product, they are all added at the beginning of the process. So now if that is the case, then now it means obviously when it comes to conversion cost, they say they are added uniformly. That means they are incurred uniformly. It's always the case that conversion costs are added uniformly, because you can't add electricity at the beginning of the process and you add all the electricity. It means you consume the electricity as the production process goes by. So now that is why they say conversion costs are incurred uniformly, and these are the costs that you cannot incur in the beginning of the process and you are done. As the process of production goes by, employees who are direct employees, they will be paid salary as the process goes by. So now meaning you can't incur all the salaries in the beginning of the process and then after you are done. There's no way that employees will be paid a salary before time. So now those costs will be incurred uniformly. That means as the process of production goes by, they will be incurred. However, when it comes to material can be added all at the beginning of the process. Now, it says assume that we are dealing with the process 2 or the second process. That means there was a first process and we are dealing with the second process. And we are required to calculate the inspected units and to calculate the normal and abnormal loss. Then after the equivalent completed units for normal and abnormal loss. So now we'll do the 3 in terms of answering this first example. So now let me just draw an underline that will simplify everything, and this is example number 1 that we are doing as EG1 that we are busy with. So now for us to determine the number of units that pass the point of inspection, we always have to draw this underline. And when you draw this underline, you write 100% at the end, because when the product is finished, it will be 100%. And however, the product started at 0%. So now we need to check the point of inspection, and we are told that the inspection point takes place when the units are 50% complete. It means our inspection point will be in the middle of the process, and this will be 50%. And this will be the point of inspection. So now we inspect when the units are 50% in terms of completion. Then now we go to the second percentage, where we look at the opening and the closing, so that we determine either did the opening or the closing pass through the point of inspection or not. If no, therefore now we deduct. If yes, we do nothing about that. Here is our opening stock. Our opening stock is 40% in terms of completion with regard to conversion cost. Therefore, now 40% will definitely be before 50%, meaning it will be there around 40%. That will be the opening stock. So now these are the units that we open with. So now we have to check how much is the percentage of the closing stock. And our closing stock is 60% in terms of conversion cost. And we have the number of units. Don't forget, we have the number of units of opening and also the number of units of closing. But we'll deal with that when we do the actual calculation to check either these units, did they pass the point of inspection or not. So now our closing stock is 60%. Then we record that 60% just above 50%. And this will be our closing stock. Now let me again go and link all this with what I've highlighted to you in the beginning as the theory. Remember, there was a statement that spoke about opening and closing. It said opening stock moves from a given percentage up to 100%. That means whenever you see an opening stock, you must know that it will move from that given percentage up to 100%. and the given percentage of the opening stock in our case, it is 40%. That means the 40% units, which is the 2,000 units, which are 40% in terms of completion, they will move from 40% up to 100%. So now that means when we go and we look in the underline, it means the opening stock will move from 40% up to 100%. That's what they are telling us in that sentence. However, they told us that closing stock moves from 0% up to a given percentage. What is the given percentage? Here is the given percentage of the closing stock. The given percentage of closing stock is 60%. Here is the given percentage. It is given unto us. That we cannot argue. It is given. Now they say it moved from 0 to a given percentage. So now, meaning it will move from 0 up to a given percentage. Meaning when we go and we link this with our underline, it means the closing stock that we see here, this closing stock moved from 0, this is 0%. It moved from 0 up to a given percent, and here is the given percent. However, with regard to opening stock moved from a given percentage, which is 40%, up to 100%. So now that's what those two sentences mean, and they are very important for the understanding of the calculation of this. So now we know that there is a total of 20,000 units that were introduced in the beginning of the process. They told us that 20,000 units were introduced as input or output in the beginning of the process. So now we have to determine if did the opening stock pass through the point of inspection. If the answer is yes, then we will do nothing. But if the answer is no, we were told that we have to deduct the units that did not pass the point of inspection. So now let us go and check if that is the case. So now look, in this case we have our opening stock. Let's start with the opening stock. Remember, I told you that opening stock move from a given percentage, and this is the given percentage, up to 100%. No, so now the question is, will the opening stock pass the point of inspection? The answer is yes, the opening stock will pass the point of inspection. Why the answer is that is because this sentence told us that opening stock move from a given percentage or percentage given up to 100%. And here is the given percentage in terms of opening, that is 40%, and they said it move up to 100%. So now it will say 40, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. It will pass 50 up to 100%. So now when we ask ourselves, will the opening stock pass the point of inspection? The answer is yes. And if it's yes, it means we don't do anything. We leave those units, because the 2,000 units that were the opening stock, which is these units, which were the opening stock, the 2,000 units, they are already inside the units that were introduced. They are already part and parcel of that 20,000 units that were introduced. So now it means the answer is yes. Therefore, now if the answer is yes, we don't do anything. Yes, the opening will pass the point of inspection. The answer is yes, because it starts from a given percentage up to 100%. Now let us go to the closing stock. With regard to the closing stock, the entry told us that closing stock move from 0% up to a given percentage. What is a given percentage? Here's the given percentage, which is 60% in terms of the closing stock with regard to the conversion cost. So now they said it moved from 0% to a given percent. Let us go and check the 0% and the given percent in our underline or timeline. So now here we have our closing stock. Our closing stock is 60% in terms of completion. 60% in terms of completion. And they told us that closing stock move from 0% up to a given percent. Move from 0% up to a given percent. So now let us check where is 0%. Here is 0%. We all know that this is 0%. So now closing stock moved from 0% up to the given percentage, and the given percentage is 60%. So now that means did the opening stock pass, did the closing stock pass the point of inspection? The answer is yes. Closing stock did pass the point of inspection. Why? Because it moved from 0% up to a given percent, and 60% is above 50%. 60% is above 50%. It means these units, they move from here and they pass the point of inspection, and when they were 60%, it was the end of the production period. Therefore, now they stopped. So now it means also with regard to the closing stock, the answer is yes. Closing stock have passed the point of inspection. And if the units pass the point of inspection, we don't do anything. So now both the opening and the closing stock, they did pass the point of inspection. So now it means we have yes and we have yes, and if we both have yes, it means we have to calculate now our loss. That means we can be able to say opening plus closing units did pass the point of inspection. Units did pass the point of inspection. Did pass the point of inspection. The point of inspection. And if the answer is yes, they did pass the point of inspection, it means we don't do anything. There is our statement. If yes, do not deduct anything. Use the total input or output units as units inspected. That means use the 20,000, which is the total input and output units, as units inspected. So now that tells us that the total units will be used as the units of to be inspected for a loss. We have 20,000 units that were introduced, which is input and output. Therefore, now it means we have to say the 20,000 units. We have to multiply that or calculate. Let me say calculating units inspected. Units inspected. Units inspected. So now we are calculating the units inspected. It will be 20,000 units. Remember, we don't deduct the opening, either the closing. It will be 20,000 times by 10%. Where is the 10% coming from? The 10% is coming from the normal loss. We were told that normal loss is 10% of the units that pass the point of inspection. Normal loss is 10% of the units that reach the point of inspection. And all these units, they reach the point of inspection, meaning the opening reached the point of inspection, the closing reached the point of inspection, and both the opening and the closing, they are already included in that 20,000 rands. So now that is why we do nothing, because they are already inside. But if they did not pass the point of inspection, therefore now we're going to remove them and don't inspect them. Therefore now they will not be included in the calculation of the normal loss or units to be inspected. So now hence we say units to be inspected, it will be 20,000 units. These are the units to be inspected. Therefore now we have to calculate our normal loss. Calculate our normal loss. Calculate our normal loss, and our normal loss will be 20,000 times by 10%. This is where I'm supposed to multiply by 10%. Normal loss will be 2,000 units. Normal loss will be 2,000 units. So now if we have 2,000 units, that is the normal loss. How much is our total loss? Because we were given and we were told that the total loss is 5,000 units. So now if this is the total loss is 5,000 units, and we know that our normal loss is 2,000, then obviously the difference is supposed to be another type of a loss, which is called abnormal loss. So now that means this will help us to calculate our abnormal loss. Calculate our abnormal loss. And abnormal loss is total loss. It is total loss less normal loss. Less normal loss. So now our total loss is 5,000 units and our normal loss is 2,000 units. then we subtract 2,000 units, and that will give us the abnormal loss of 3,000 units. So now this will be abnormal loss of 3,000 units. So now abnormal loss will be 3,000 units. Then after, we have to do the so-called equivalent units. We have to do the equivalent units in terms of how to allocate these units. Equivalent units, we have PP, which is the previous process. Then after, we have raw material. Then after, we have conversion cost, raw material and conversion cost. Then let us draw the lines in between just to show you how to allocate for this loss that we have just calculated. So now our normal loss will be recognized. Our normal loss will be recognized only as an amount of 2,000. Normal loss will be recognized as 2,000. There will be our normal loss. Our normal loss will not be recorded in any previous process raw material, either under the conversion cost. However, when it comes to abnormal loss will be allocated. Abnormal loss will be allocated as 3,000 units. Abnormal loss 3,000. Under the previous process, it will be 3,000. Under raw material, it will be 3,000. However, when it comes to conversion cost, our abnormal loss will be calculated based on the point of inspection. Remember, these units were inspected during the process. So now it means when it comes to conversion cost, we have to say 3,000 times by the point of inspection, which is 50%, 50 over 100, because we inspected the units when they were 50% in terms of completion. That means only 50% will be allocated under our conversion cost, which will be 1,500. The 50%, guys, the 50% being the point of inspection, because we know that our units are inspected when they are 50%. So now when it comes to conversion cost, you always multiply by the percentage of the inspection point. That means the percentage in which the units are being inspected. Therefore, now that will give us the units to be allocated under the conversion cost. And at the same time, let me just show you that it says here, losses took place during the process, because we are dealing with the loss here that took place during the process. Why it says during the process? Because we inspected when the units were 50%, meaning it was obviously during the process. And it says abnormal losses will be valued according to the stage of completion of the units when they were lost. So now it says according to the stage of completion of the units when they were lost. So now the units were lost when they were 50% in terms of completion, because that was the time when the inspection took place. So now that is why we allocate 50% of that to the conversion cost. However, with regard to materials, because raw material was all introduced at the beginning of the process. So now that is the reason why we are ignorant of the raw material, because we were told that material is added at the beginning of the process. However, conversion cost is added uniformly. So now they also emphasize that above, where they tell us that whenever the loss took place during the process, abnormal loss will be valued according to the stage of completion of the units when they were lost. So now we leave. When it comes to normal loss, we always just don't allocate it throughout, only under the first part, just identifying the amount of the normal loss. You'll see further of this when we do again the second part. So now let us continue with that and check if did we leave anything not completed. So now we have all the units, and the units in terms of the loss. Here we do have our units. There are two units that we have, the normal and the abnormal. And here are our units, equivalent. Let me just draw a line here so that everything is clear. Here are the units of the loss, 2,000 and 3,000. Now let us go to the second example. And the second example is example number 2, e.g. number 2. Under example number 2, we will read again and do the same calculations. Example number 2 says to us that total input and output units is 20,000. Again, we started with 20,000 units, and they say opening inventory is 60% in terms of completion. Remember, opening moves from a given percent up to 100%. It moves from a given percent up to 100%. Then we are given closing stock, which is 40% in terms of conversion cost. So now we know that closing stock move from 0% to a given percent to a given percent. That means in this case from 0% to 40% because the given percent is 40%. And now when it comes to opening, we said it move from a given percent, which is 60%, up to 100%. So now have that in mind whenever you are dealing with the losses. So now we are again given a total loss of 5,000 units. And it further says again, normal loss is 10% of the units that reach the point of inspection. And inspection takes place when the production is 50% complete. So now inspection takes place when the production is 50% complete. Meaning now, once again, when the units are 50% complete, then we have to do the inspection and we have to allocate to the conversion cost only the 50% of the abnormal loss into the conversion cost. Only 50% will be allocated to the conversion cost. However, with regard to material, we don't do anything because the material is introduced at the beginning of the process. Then now, in this case, it says material is added at the beginning of the process and conversion cost is added uniformly. They are telling us the same thing. And they say also assume that we are dealing with the first process. That means process number 1 is still the first process that we are dealing with. So now dealing with the first process, we continue in this example. Then we do the first process. That means if it's the first process, is the starting process that we are dealing with. So now let us continue and we do the underline once again to check if did these units pass the point of inspection or not. That is what we are looking for. If they did pass the point of inspection, we do nothing. If they did not, then we deduct. So now our point of inspection is still 50%. Nothing has changed. And our opening is given at, again, is given at 60%. That is, our opening is at 60%, meaning our opening is above the inspection point. Our opening is above the inspection point. This is inspection. And this is our opening. Our opening is above the inspection point. Take point of that. And our closing is before the point of inspection. Our closing is before the point of inspection, which is 40% in this case. Therefore, now this is our closing units. Now, please don't forget what this exercise has been teaching us throughout. That opening moves from a given percentage up to 100%. Let us go and check. It said opening move from a given percent up to 100%. So now once again, opening moves from percentage given up to 100%. Let us go and check how is that applicable in this case. Opening moves from a given percent. The given percent in terms of opening is 60%. It moves from a given percent up to 100%. Given percent up to 100%. So now it means if it moves from 60 up to 100, it will not pass the point of inspection now because it has already passed the point of inspection in the previous day. That's why now it becomes the opening, meaning the opening will not pass the point of inspection. Not now. It has passed previously already, but now it will move from a given percent up to 100%. And when you get to 100%, then it means it will not be inspected in this time because it was already inspected. So now if not means no. and if no, deduct. So now we know that if no, deduct. And how many units of the opening do we have? We have the units of the opening under example number 2 as 2000 units. It means these 2000 units must be deducted from the total input and output. So now that will have to be less 2000. So now we go and check our closing stock. Our closing stock is 40% in terms of completion. And we know the principle. The principle says closing stock move from 0% up to a given percent. What is a given percent? A given percent is 40%. Here the closing given percent. It moved from 0% up to a given percent. So now will the closing now in this period pass the point of inspection or in this day? The answer is not. So now if the answer is not, it means deduct the units that did not pass the point of inspection. So now it means in this case, both the opening and the closing will not pass the point of inspection, which is the point of inspection that we can see that it is 50%. Both of them, they did not pass. Here I do have my black pen that I'm using from 0% up to a given percent. It did not pass the point of inspection. From a given percent in the terms of closing, from a given percent, which is 60%, up to the total of 100%. So now that means both of them, they will not go through the point of inspection. Now we continue on that same note. Then we go to the units that were the input and the output. So now we go to the units that were the input and the output. Let us first write the summary of what we have sent. It says opening in summary plus closing units did not pass the point of inspection. Did not pass point of inspection, or did not pass point of inspection, or did not move through inspection point. Did not move through inspection point. Therefore, deduct. Units that did not pass the point of inspection. So now let us calculate units inspected. Because we know now how many units were inspected. We'll be able to know. Units inspected is always total input output, which is 20,000. Deduct the units that did not go through the point of inspection, which is the 2,000 minus 5,000. Where the 2,000 coming from? 2,000 is the opening, 2,000 units opening. 5,000 is the closing. Both of them in example 2 did not pass the point of inspection. So now that means units to be inspected will be a total of only 13,000 units. Only 13,000 units, which is 20,000 minus 2,000 minus 5,000. That will give us 13,000 units that pass the point of inspection. And we have to multiply this by 10%. And that 10% is the normal loss, because we were told that a normal loss is 10%. Or let me not do that now. That 10% is the normal loss. So now we know that the units that will be inspected is 13,000 units. Then let us calculate our normal loss. Our normal loss will be 13,000 units, or units that reach the point of inspection times by 10%. Therefore now that means only 1,300 units will be a normal loss. Then after we calculate our abnormal loss once again, our abnormal loss will be the total loss. Remember, our total loss is 5,000. It will be total loss less normal loss, less our normal loss. Our total loss is 5,000 units. Our normal loss is 1,300. Therefore, now that will give us 3,700 units as abnormal loss. Let us check if our total loss is really, here is our total loss. It is correctly 5,000 units. So now we set total loss, which is 5,000, we less 1,300, which is the normal loss, and that gave us the amount of 3,700 as our abnormal loss. So now let us do again the equivalent units. Let us do again the equivalent units. Then we say equivalent. Under equivalent we have the units, and we have previous process, we have raw material, we have conversion cost. And remember, we are only focusing on the losses here. Our normal loss, the number of units of the normal loss is 1,300, and it does not get to be recorded anywhere. Then our abnormal loss, the number of units of the abnormal loss is 3,700. Previous process 3.7, raw material 3.7, conversion cost, it will be a percentage at the point of inspection, and we know that our percentage point of inspection is 50%. That means only 50% will be allocated as the loss in terms of the conversion cost, because conversion costs are incurred uniformly. That will be 3,700 times by 50%, and that will give us 1,850 units that will be allocated as the loss in terms of conversion cost, because when the units were 50% complete, they were inspected and the loss was identified. Therefore, now only half will be allocated in terms of conversion cost. So now this was the second example, and I hope now your eyes are a little bit opened. Even if you did not know anything, but you know that your eyes are opened. You are blind now that you see. That's the only thing that you know. So now let us continue to the last example, which is example number 3. We are still dealing with the calculation of the loss, where we first have to check how many units pass the point of inspection. First, the question, did these units pass the point of inspection? If the answer is yes, you do nothing. If the answer is no, you deduct. So now we go to the third example, example number 3. Total input and output units, still 20,000 units. Opening work in process 30%. Remember, opening start from a given percent up to 100%. And there is 2,000 units that were there in the beginning as opening. Then after we have closing work in process, which is 60% in terms of conversion cost. And there were 5,000 units that were still in process, and those units were 60% in terms of completion with regard to conversion cost. Remember, guys, the reason why opening and closing is normally only applicable in the case of the conversion cost is because most of the times material is added at the beginning of the process. Just like in this case, material is added at the beginning of the process. So now it means 100% of the material is there at the beginning of the process. So now, even if the product is not complete, but with regard to material, all the material is there. 100% of the material is there. That is why the closing units that are not complete, they are not complete in terms of conversion cost, and not complete in terms of our conversion cost, in terms of labor, in terms of overheads, in terms of the electricity, in terms of the depreciation, in terms of the salary of the supervisors. All the overheads now, they are not yet complete. But with regard to material, all the material that was needed was there in the product that was being produced. So now that is why when it comes to raw material, most of the times it will be 100%. There will not be closing balance of the material not yet introduced in the process of production, because all the material are added at the beginning of the process. That is most of the cases. However, in some cases, material can be introduced in the middle of the process of production. Just like if you are doing a table or manufacturing a table. When you manufacture a table, all the plank that you need will all be there as you start the production process of the table. However, all other overheads will be incurred as you produce the product, even if the table is not complete, but all the material in terms of the plank will all be there 100% by the beginning of the process of production. So now let me begin with example number 3. I was just emphasizing something that I think is very important for your understanding. Our total input output is still again 20,000 units, and our opening is 30% in terms of completion with regard to conversion cost. And we know that this moves from a given percent, which is 30%, up to 100%. It moved from a given percent up to 100%. Closing stock is 60% completion in terms of the conversion cost, and we know that closing moved from 0% up to a given percent, and our given percent is 60%. So now I'm just doing practically what I've been emphasizing to you. So now remember, this will help us when we are determining the units that pass the point of inspection. So now if those units did pass the point of inspection, then we don't do anything, but if not, we deduct the units that did not pass the point of inspection. And we know that opening units that were there 30% complete, it was 2,000, and closing stock that were there 60% complete, it was 5,000 units. So now we do have the units to deduct if they did not pass the point, or they will not pass the point of inspection during the current period of production. So now it's also again that total loss is 5,000 units, and our normal loss is 10% of the units that reach the point of inspection. So now further say that inspection takes place when the production is 75% complete. That means when the units are 75% in terms of completion, therefore now inspection normally takes place. Then all the material are added at the beginning of the process, and the conversion cost is added uniformly. Then it further says, assume that we are dealing with the first process. That means assume that we are dealing with the process number 1. Again, we'll be doing the same, which is the same and the last underlined, and I hope at this stage at least your eyes are a bit opened. So now we are doing example number 3. And it's the last example, and this example will still again draw the timeline. Some they call it the timeline, some they call it underline, some they call it umcamanani. However you call it in your language. However, at the end of the day, we are doing cost accounting too in the year 2017. So now we first have to draw the point of inspection. It doesn't matter what to start with. We know that our point of inspection is 75%. That is the point of inspection, 75%. So now let us write the point of inspection in our underline or in our timeline. Therefore now 75% can be approximately around there. That means when our units are 75% in terms of completion, they will be inspected. Then we go back, we check how much is the percentage of the opening, and the percentage of the opening is given to us as 30%. So now meaning our opening is 30% in terms of completion, and we go and we write that 30% in the close range of 30%. So now we draw that 30% somewhere there, somewhere 30% will be, and that is our opening units. That is our opening units, and our closing units is there at 60%. Our closing units is 60% completed in terms of the conversion cost. So now we write 60% somewhere just above half of the line. So now that will be 60%, and this is the closing units. This is the closing units. Don't forget that our timeline end up to 100% and our timeline start at 0%. Every product start from 0 and it end up to 100%. So now let us check if things working good for us in terms of testing. If did the opening or the closing pass, or will it pass the point of inspection? Remember the principle, remember the basics, that our opening starts from a given percent up to 100%. Let me remind you of that once again. Our opening start from a given percent up to 100%. Here is again bringing you back to basics. Opening start from a given percent or percentage given up to 100%, and our percentage given is 30%, meaning from 30% up to 100%. That's where we are going. And our closing start from 0% up to a given percent or percentage given, and 0% is 0%, it does not change, up to a given percent, which is 60%. So now that is where we'll be moving. Take note of this, guys. It is always very critical and very crucial for you to understand process costing. So now we are starting with the opening, and we say that opening start from a given percent up to 100%, and the given percent is 30% that we have here. So now meaning our opening will start from 30% up to 100%. That's what it means. So now will the opening pass the point of inspection? Yes, you can see the line has passed the point of inspection. Here is the inspection point, 75%, and it passed it through up to 100% because we've answered exactly what we've been talking about. So now our opening will definitely pass the point of inspection because it will start from a given percent and pass 75, and 100% is above 75, and it will pass up to 100%. So now it means the answer here is yes, it will pass the point of inspection. So now if it will pass, then it means do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, or do not deduct anything. Then let us check the closing stock. Our closing stock, we know that our closing stock is 60%, and we know that the closing start from 0 up to a given percent. From 0 up to a given percent, and we know that a 0% is here. That is 0% from the timeline. From 0%, closing will move or moved from 0, and it moved far, and it stopped. And it was the end of the production day, end of the period. Did the closing stock pass the point of inspection? The answer is no. It did not pass. It stopped at 60%, which is before 75%. So now it means if the answer is no, deduct the units that did not pass through the point of inspection. Deduct. Therefore, now we're deducting in this case. So now in this case, we will have to do a summary once again of the conclusion of the whole matter. Meaning we say opening units moved through point of inspection. Opening units move through point of inspection. Opening units move through point of inspection. Move through inspection point. But the closing did not. But closing units did not. Therefore, deduct. Therefore, deduct closing. Then let us calculate the inspected units now. Calculate inspected units. Calculate inspected units. And our inspected units will be the total input output. Don't forget, we always start from the total input output. And our total input and output units is the 20,000 units. 20,000 units. Then we start with the total input output 20,000. We deduct our closing units, which is 5,000 units of the closing that must be deducted, less 5,000, then that will leave us with 15,000 units to be inspected. Then from there we can say these are the units that went through the point of inspection or that reached the point of inspection. So now that will be normal loss, and we know that our normal loss is 10% of the units that pass the point of inspection, or 10% of the units that reach the point of inspection. And here is 15,000 units that reach the point of inspection, and 10% of that, which is 1,500, will be a normal loss. Then after, we can calculate our abnormal loss. We can calculate our abnormal loss, and our abnormal loss will be 5,000, which is total loss minus 1,500. Remember, the total loss including normal and abnormal is 5,000 rands, so 5,000 units. So now we just say 5,000 units, we subtract the normal loss, then the difference will be abnormal. Therefore, now any loss that is above 1.5 is abnormal loss, and that abnormal loss will be the total units of 3,500 units. 3.5 units is calculated by saying 5,000 less 1,500. That will give us abnormal loss of 3.5 units. So now these are the units that are abnormal in terms of the loss. So now let us do the equivalent units. Let us do the last part, which is equivalent units. Under equivalent, we start with the units. We have previous process, we have raw material, and we have conversion cost. Then we record abnormal loss. Abnormal loss, guys, does not get to be, we start with the normal loss. Normal loss does not get to be recorded. Normal loss. Our normal loss is 1,500. Normal loss, more than 99% of the times it will stop here. It's only the abnormal loss. It's only the abnormal loss of 3,500 that will be recorded throughout. 3,500, 3,500, 3,500. Only 75% of 3,500 will be allocated to our conversion cost. Only 75%, 2,625. Because conversion cost, remember, they are not yet introduced in the process, all of them. They get to be introduced as the process of production goes by. So now, when the units were 75% complete, then there was an inspection. Therefore, now only 75% of the loss will be allocated to the conversion cost. So now, I hope that makes sense to you and you have understood something. And just to be mindful of the last part in terms of the normal loss, I explained everything. This exercise starts here in terms of theory. And it says losses took place at the beginning of the process. If the loss takes place in the beginning of the process, remember we've been dealing with the loss that took place when the units were 50% in terms of completion. The first one, our loss, is when the inspection was 50%, and the second one is when inspection was 50%, and the last one is when the inspection was 75%. So now we're dealing with the loss that took place at the beginning or during the process. Now they say losses took place at the beginning of the process. Abnormal loss will be valued at the components that were added at the beginning of the process and the previous. Meaning the loss will be recognized in the unit that were there in the beginning and the previous process. And previous process, we don't know, we're only dealing with the current process. Then the second one says loss took place at the end of the process. Units will be finished at the end of the process. So abnormal loss will be valued at the full cost. So now abnormal loss will be valued at the full complete cost. However, in this case now, they say in the last one, this is the one that we dealt with very much today. Others were not much relevant. However, just for general understanding, we now have understood something. With that being said, I will say thank you. This is just introduction to process costing. Thank you.